Claire had barely stepped out of her car when a small voice shattered everything she thought she was coming home to. "Mom." I looked across the street, toward my father's house, and froze. 3 police cruisers were parked in front of his driveway. Their emergency lights were off, but the sight alone made my stomach drop. 6-year-old Noah sat on the front steps, his cheeks soaked with tears, while 3 uniformed officers crouched nearby, speaking to him as gently as they could. The moment he saw me, he broke free and ran. He slammed into my legs, so hard I almost lost my balance. He buried his face against me and sobbed. "Mom, they said police come when people do bad things." His voice shook between every word. "Are they taking me away?" For one terrifying second, I couldn't breathe. Then I looked up. My father stood on the porch with his arms folded. My older brother Ryan stood beside him. Neither looked frightened. Neither looked guilty. They looked satisfied. And somehow, that terrified me even more. I had left for what was supposed to be a 4-day business conference in Chicago. It was the first work trip I'd accepted since my husband passed away 3 years earlier. Noah usually stayed with my father during overnight travel because, despite our disagreements, I believed family was still safer than strangers. The conference wrapped up 2 days early after the final client canceled, so I booked the first flight home, hopping to surprise Noah with dinner and a movie. Instead, I found my 6-year-old convinced the police had come to arrest him. "What happened?" I asked, keeping one arm around Noah while looking directly at my father. Walter Bennett answered before anyone else could speak. "He stole your grandmother's antique brooch." His voice was calm, almost bored. "He refuses to tell us where he hid it." Ryan nodded beside him. "We had no choice, Claire. He has to learn accountability while he's still young." I looked down at Noah. He was shaking so hard, his little hands could barely grip my jacket. "I didn't take anything," he whispered. "I told them." One of the officers stepped toward me. His expression was careful. "Ma'am, we responded to a reported theft. We've searched the areas your father identified, and at this point we've found no evidence that your son stole anything." He lowered his voice so Walter couldn't hear. "Your son has been cooperative the entire time." That single sentence told me more than everything my father had said. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply knelt in front of Noah. "Look at me." He slowly raised his head. "You are coming home with me." He nodded immediately. I thanked each officer for treating him kindly. One of them gave Noah a reassuring smile before returning to his cruiser. As I walked Noah across the street, I could feel my father's eyes on my back. He expected a fight. He expected tears. He expected me to explode. Instead, I buckled Noah into his car seat without saying another word. That night, after a long bath and 2 bowls of his favorite macaroni, Noah finally began calming down. I tucked him into bed and sat beside him until he reached for my hand. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart." They kept asking where I put Grandma's shiny flower. "The brooch." He nodded. I kept telling Grandpa I didn't touch it. He stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then he quietly added something that didn't fit anything I'd heard that afternoon. "Grandpa went upstairs before the police came." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He said he forgot something." Noah yawned. "He was gone a long time." I sat perfectly still. That wasn't how my father described the afternoon. Not even close. Someone wasn't telling the truth. But the question that kept echoing through my mind was even worse. If Noah hadn't taken anything, why would his own grandfather risk calling the police on a 6-year-old child? I waited until the next morning before asking Noah any more questions. He was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal, still unusually quiet. Normally, he would have been telling me about superheroes or asking if pancakes counted as breakfast and dessert. Instead, He kept glancing toward the front window whenever a car drove by. I sat beside him. "You don't have to tell me everything at once," I said softly. "Just tell me what you remember." He thought for a moment, swinging his legs beneath the chair. "I don't remember where Grandpa said the shiny flower was." "That's okay." I was coloring. "What happened next?" He frowned, trying to remember. "Grandpa went upstairs." "Did he say why?" "He said he forgot something." I nodded. "And then?" "He came back down really fast." Noah picked up his spoon but didn't eat. Then Uncle Ryan whispered something. I leaned in. "What did he whisper?" Noah lowered his own voice, as if he were afraid someone else might hear. "He told Grandpa." Noah paused, trying to remember the exact words. "Remember, don't change the story." Every muscle in my body tightened. Children often misremember details, but they almost never invent exact phrases. "What happened after that?" "The police came." He looked down into his cereal. "They kept asking if I knew where Grandma's flower was." His voice became very small. I kept saying I didn't. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I believe you." He looked up at me with watery eyes. "You do." Every word. For the first time since I'd arrived home, some of the fear left his face. After dropping Noah at school, I stepped into my office and closed the door before making a phone call. The officer who answered recognized my name immediately. "This is Officer Daniels." "Officer Daniels, this is Claire Bennett. I wanted to thank you again for how you treated my son yesterday." "We were happy to help." There was a brief silence before he added carefully, "How's he doing?" "Still frightened." I was afraid of that. I hesitated before asking the question that had been bothering me all night. My father wanted to question Noah alone, didn't he? Officer Daniels didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. "Your father requested that we speak with your son before you arrived." "And?" "We declined." "Why?" "Because he's 6. The simplicity of the answer made my stomach turn. "We told your father we would not interview a child that age without a parent or appropriate guardian present unless there were extraordinary circumstances." "There weren't." "No." I closed my eyes. My father wasn't happy about that, was he? Officer Daniels let out a slow breath. He was persistent. That single word said enough. After hanging up, I opened the messages my father had sent during my business trip. At the time, nothing had seemed unusual. Now every message felt different. Noah's outside playing. He's too busy having fun to video chat. We'll call tomorrow. Tomorrow had never come. Each evening, I'd asked to speak with Noah. Each evening, my father had found another excuse. I opened my call history. 4 missed opportunities. 4 polite explanations. 4 times, I'd accepted his word without questioning it. He hadn't simply been watching Noah. He'd been keeping Noah away from me. That afternoon, I scrolled through our extended family's shared photo album. Birthdays, Christmas, Sunday dinners. Then I found a picture taken almost 3 weeks earlier during my aunt's birthday. The antique brooch my father claimed Noah had stolen wasn't on the hallway display cabinet. I checked another photograph from 2 weeks before that. Still missing. Another. Nothing. I enlarged each picture. The display case was clearly visible. The velvet stand where the brooch supposedly rested had been empty for weeks. I leaned back in my chair. My father had insisted Noah took it from the display yesterday. But according to these photographs, it hadn't even been there. Instead of calling my father, I opened a notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "Everything that doesn't make sense." Underneath, I listed every inconsistency. The missing video calls. The empty display cabinet. Noah's memory of Grandpa going upstairs. Ryan's whispered words. Officer Daniels refusing to question Noah alone. One contradiction after another. Then I submitted a formal request for the complete police incident report. Not because I already knew what had happened. Because facts don't forget. People do. Late that afternoon, my phone rang again. It was Officer Daniels. I wanted to let you know your report request has been approved. Thank you. There was something else. I grabbed my pen. What is it? His voice became almost confidential. Mrs. Bennett. Yes. There's one thing in that report you really need to read. The police incident report arrived in my email less than an hour later. I printed every page instead of reading it on a screen. Paper forced me to slow down. I spread the report across my dining room table and started highlighting every statement my father had made. The first page looked ordinary enough. Date. Time. Address. Responding officers. Then I reached Walter Bennett's written statement. It read, I personally observed my grandson, Noah Bennett, remove the antique brooch from the hallway display cabinet. When confronted, he concealed the item and refused to disclose its location. I read the sentence twice. Then I turned the page. Officer Daniels' supplemental notes stopped me cold. Complainant later advised he noticed the item missing after searching the residence. I blinked. Those two statements couldn't both be true. Either my father watched Noah take the brooch, or he only realized it was missing after searching the house. He had given two completely different versions of the same event. I circled both passages in red ink. Then I drew a line connecting them. The first crack in his story wasn't emotional. It was documented. I needed more than contradictions. I needed something objective. I walked across the street to my father's next-door neighbor, Mrs. Callahan. She answered the door carrying a basket of laundry. Claire, you're home early. I need to ask you something. The smile faded from her face when she saw mine. Is everything okay? Do your security cameras cover my father's driveway? They do. She frowned. Why? I hesitated only long enough to choose my words carefully. I believe they may have recorded something important. Mrs. Callahan didn't ask another question. Instead, she invited me inside. Within minutes, we were reviewing footage from the previous afternoon. The timestamp rolled backward. 2 hours before officers arrived. 90 minutes. 75. Then, there, Mrs. Callahan said. The video showed my father walking across his driveway. In his hands was a small locked wooden box. He looked around before carrying it into the garage. I stared at the screen. Can you rewind that? She did. Again. Same result. The box disappeared into the garage nearly an hour before anyone had called the police. I couldn't yet prove what was inside, but the timing immediately contradicted everything Walter had claimed. Mrs. Callahan looked at me. Claire. What? I've lived next to your father for 22 years. She pointed toward the screen. I've never seen him carry that box before. By evening, word had already started spreading through the family. Not because of me. Because of Walter. My aunt called first. Claire, your father says Noah has been acting out. My cousin texted minutes later. Uncle Walter says you're having a hard time controlling him. Then my younger cousin sent another message. Is everything okay with Noah? I understood exactly what my father was doing. He wasn't just accusing Noah. He was quietly building a story that I had become an irresponsible mother. If enough people believed that version first, every defense I offered would sound like damage control. I refused to let that happen. Instead of arguing over the phone, I made one decision. I called everyone. Since we're already gathering for Grandma's birthday dinner this Saturday, I said, let's keep the plans. My aunt sounded relieved. That's probably for the best. It is. Then I added one sentence. I'd like everyone to hear the same facts at the same time. Saturday evening arrived. The dining room that had hosted birthdays, graduations, and holidays for decades felt strangely tense. Walter sat at the head of the table, as he always had. Ryan leaned back confidently with his arms crossed. Neither expected me to challenge them publicly. After dinner, I stood. I need 5 minutes. Every conversation stopped. I placed copies of the police report on the table. What is this? Ryan asked. The official incident report. Walter's face remained calm. I slid one highlighted page toward my aunt. Please read my father's statement. She did. Then I handed her officer Daniel's supplemental notes. Her eyebrows knitted together. These aren't the same. They can't both be true, I said quietly. The room fell silent. Ryan scoffed. You're making a big deal out of paperwork. I looked directly at him. Am I? Walter finally spoke. Police reports contain mistakes all the time. Maybe. I folded my hands. But these aren't officers contradicting each other. I paused. These are your own words contradicting themselves. For the first time that evening, several relatives exchanged uncertain glances. Walter noticed it too. His confidence flickered. Only for a second. Then he straightened in his chair. You've always been dramatic, Claire. Ryan nodded. Exactly. Dad was trying to protect family property. I didn't argue. Instead, I reached into my purse. I requested something else. Walter's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I asked for additional evidence. The room became completely still. It hasn't arrived yet, I said calmly. But when it does, we'll know exactly what happened before the police ever got there. Walter's fingers tightened around his water glass. It was the first visible sign that he wasn't completely certain anymore. Just then, my phone buzzed against the dining room table. I looked down at the screen. The neighborhood security footage had finished uploading. Every conversation around the table stopped the moment my phone vibrated. Ryan glanced at the screen. What now? I looked at the notification. The neighborhood camera footage was ready to download. I need to leave for a few minutes, I said calmly. Walter stood. This conversation isn't over. It will be. I slipped my phone into my purse. Just not tonight. Without another word, I walked out. For the first time in my life, I left my father's house while he was still trying to control the conversation. The following morning, I met my attorney, Melissa Grant. She specialized in family law, but had also handled cases involving false reports and abuse of legal processes. She connected my phone to a monitor in her office. Let's watch everything from the beginning. The footage started more than 2 hours before police arrived. Cars passed. Neighbors walked dogs. Nothing unusual. Then Walter appeared. There, I said. Melissa paused the video. Walter was carrying the same locked wooden box Mrs. Callahan and I had seen the night before. Continue. We watched him enter the garage. A second camera angle, mounted above the neighboring driveway, captured the garage through the partially open door. Walter walked directly to a tall storage cabinet. He unlocked it, placed the wooden box inside, locked the cabinet again. Then he walked back into the house. Melissa froze the frame. What time is that? I read the timestamp. 2:17 p.m. When did Noah arrive home from school? About 3 o'clock. She nodded slowly. So whatever was in that box couldn't have been hidden by Noah. Exactly. We kept watching, At 4:08 p.m., Ryan walked into the garage. He looked over both shoulders before unlocking the same cabinet. He opened the door just wide enough to reach inside. Then he closed it again, locked it, and went back into the house. Melissa rewound the clip. Again. Same actions. Same cabinet. Same box. Neither man ever looked toward the neighboring camera. Neither realized they had been recorded. I felt a chill run through me. They weren't reacting to a missing heirloom. They were managing something they already knew was there. Melissa reached for another document. The dispatch records came in this morning. She laid them beside the police report. Look at the times. Walter called emergency dispatch before conducting any documented search of the home. The timeline was impossible to ignore. According to his own statements, he supposedly searched the house before deciding to call police. According to dispatch records, he made the decision first. Everything afterward had simply been arranged to support it. Melissa tapped the page with her pen. This changes the entire case. How? If someone honestly believes property has been stolen, they're reporting a suspected theft. She looked directly at me. But if they decide to involve police before even attempting to verify the facts? She let the sentence hang. It suggests the report itself may have been the objective. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I quietly asked, "So this was never really about the brooch?" Melissa answered without hesitation. "No. It was about creating an official accusation. That afternoon, we submitted formal complaints. Not emotional letters. Not social media posts. Official documentation. We requested preservation of every responding officer's body camera footage. The dispatch recordings. Radio communications. Written statements. Everything connected to that afternoon. If this goes any further," Melissa explained, "we don't want evidence disappearing through routine retention policies." I signed every form. Each signature felt less like revenge and more like protection. Protection for Noah. Protection for the truth. News traveled faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, relatives who had ignored my calls suddenly wanted to talk. Not because I had argued. Because they had heard I possessed evidence. My aunt called first. "Claire, is it true there are videos?" "Yes." A long silence followed. "I don't know what your father was thinking." "I don't either." Another cousin texted. "Ryan says this has all gotten out of hand." I stared at the message. Out of hand. As though a frightened 6-year-old sitting in front of 3 police officers had been some unfortunate misunderstanding. I didn't respond. Walter called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, he called again. Then again. Finally, he left a message. "Claire, we don't need outsiders involved. We're family. Let's sit down and work this out privately." I listened once, then saved the recording. Ryan tried next. "You've made your point," he said when I answered. "Have I? You're embarrassing, Dad." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My son thought he was going to jail. Ryan sighed impatiently. Nobody was actually going to arrest him. I closed my eyes. Tell that to the 6-year-old who spent the night asking whether police were coming back. Ryan had no answer. The line went silent. I ended the call. 6 days after I came home early. 6 days after finding Noah crying in front of 3 police officers. The investigation no longer centered on my little boy. It centered on the adults who had accused him. Walter and Ryan arrived separately for their interviews. They no longer looked confident. They looked tired. Careful. The investigator placed printed photographs from the security cameras on the table. Then he laid the dispatch timeline beside them. Walter began explaining his version once again. I searched the house, and after, the investigator raised a hand. Mr. Bennett. Walter stopped speaking. The room became completely quiet. The investigator slid one photograph forward, then another. Finally, he asked the question that changed everything. Can you explain why your timeline doesn't match the video? Walter stared at the photographs for several long seconds. The confidence that had carried him through decades as a respected retired police lieutenant was suddenly nowhere to be found. He picked up the first image, set it down, then reached for the dispatch log. I don't remember the exact sequence anymore. The investigator remained calm. You were very specific in your written statement. Walter swallowed. I may have confused the order. The investigator slid another document across the table. This is your second statement. Walter looked down. You gave a different version here. He didn't answer. Then came the body camera footage. One responding officer could be heard asking, "Have you searched every room?" Walter answered clearly. Not yet. I wanted officers here first. The room fell silent. His own words erased the story he had been defending for nearly a week. Ryan's interview didn't go much better. At first, he insisted he had only supported his father because he believed Noah had taken the brooch. Then investigators showed him the security footage. There he was, unlocking the garage cabinet, looking over his shoulder before opening it, closing it again, locking it. He rubbed both hands across his face. I wasn't hiding anything. The investigator asked quietly. Then, why did you check the cabinet before officers entered the house? Ryan looked toward the table. No answer came. Finally, he whispered. Dad told me to make sure it stayed there. The investigator leaned forward. What stayed there? Ryan closed his eyes. The box. Later that afternoon, investigators searched the storage cabinet. The locked wooden box was exactly where the video showed Walter placing it. Inside was my late mother's antique brooch, still wrapped in the same velvet cloth she had always used. Untouched. No fingerprints belonging to Noah. No evidence he had ever handled it. The accusation collapsed in a matter of minutes. The brooch had never disappeared. It had been hidden. When confronted with everything together, the video, the dispatch records, the body camera footage, Ryan's admission, and the recovered brooch, Walter finally stopped denying what he had done. He looked older than I had ever seen him. Not because of the investigation. Because, for the first time, no amount of authority could rescue him. I never thought they would actually scare him that badly, he said quietly. I stared at him across the interview room. You called the police on a 6-year-old. I thought officers showing up would make him admit where it was. He didn't have it. Walter looked away. I know. The words echoed through the room. I felt every remaining piece of hope disappear. You knew. He nodded once. I hid it. My chest tightened. Why? He finally looked at me. You've been making decisions without me. I've been raising my son. You stopped asking my advice. I became his parent after Daniel died. Walter sighed. I thought, if there was an official report, you'd realize you needed more help. The sentence hung in the air. He hadn't been trying to recover stolen property. He had been trying to regain control. Ryan spoke with me several days later. Not because he wanted to apologize. Because investigators encouraged him to cooperate fully. I should have stopped him, he admitted. You should have. I thought he was teaching you a lesson. I couldn't believe those words. A lesson. You'd been saying no to him. I looked directly at my brother. So you decided my 6-year-old would be terrified by police officers. Ryan lowered his head. I didn't think he'd react like that. I answered quietly. You never stopped to think how any child would react. He had nothing left to say. The responding officers later met with me to explain what would happen next. Officer Daniels sat across from Noah in a quiet community room instead of a police station. He wasn't wearing sunglasses. His voice was gentle. Do you remember me? Noah nodded cautiously. You were nice. Officer Daniels smiled. I want you to know something. What? You didn't do anything wrong. Noah looked at me before looking back at him. So, police aren't mad? No. They never were. The little crease that had stayed between Noah's eyebrows since that afternoon slowly disappeared. He smiled for the first time in days. The investigation concluded that Walter had knowingly made a false report and provided misleading information during the investigation. His standing in the community changed almost overnight. Neighbors who had once admired him now questioned his judgment. Friends quietly distanced themselves. The respect he had spent years building dissolved because people learned he had used his reputation to target his own grandson. Ryan's involvement became public as well. He stepped down from his leadership role in the neighborhood association after members learned he had helped support the false accusation. Several relatives who had initially believed their version called me personally. I'm sorry, my aunt said through tears. I should have asked you what happened before believing the rumors. You weren't the only one. One by one, other family members apologized. Not because I demanded it, because the evidence left no room for excuses. I worked with my attorney to put permanent legal protections in place. Walter and Ryan would no longer have unsupervised access to Noah. Neither could present themselves as his guardians or make decisions on his behalf. For the first time since Daniel died, I stopped believing that keeping peace with my family was the same thing as protecting my son. It wasn't. Real protection sometimes meant walking away. Several months later, our neighborhood hosted its annual Community Safety Day. Police cars lined the park so children could climb inside and ask questions. I wasn't sure Noah would want to go. When we arrived, he stopped for a moment after spotting Officer Daniels. Then something wonderful happened. Instead of hiding behind my leg, he waved. Officer Daniels waved back with a huge smile. Hey, partner. Noah grinned. He spent the next 20 minutes sitting inside a patrol car, pressing buttons while another officer explained what each one did. On the drive home, he looked out the window and said something that nearly brought me to tears. Mom. Yeah, buddy. I'm not scared of police anymore. I reached over and squeezed his hand. I'm so glad. He smiled at me. They help people. They do. That was the moment I realized the greatest victory wasn't exposing my father. It wasn't proving my brother lied. It wasn't watching the truth finally come out. It was knowing my son no longer carried the fear they had forced onto him. They tried to use a badge to frighten a little boy into silence. Instead, the truth exposed the adults who abused his trust. And while that terrible afternoon lasted only a few hours, the choice I made afterward protected my son for the rest of his childhood. The day they tried to make my 6-year-old feel like a criminal lasted only a few hours, but the truth they tried to hide changed our family forever.